The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people looked up at the night sky and dreamed of what waited beyond. They built rockets. They walked on moons. They created ships that could travel faster than light itself. And finally, after centuries of dreaming, humanity reached out to touch the stars. They expected wonders. They expected mysteries. They expected challenges. They did not expect a death sentence. Commander Kira stood in a chamber so vast it made her feel like an insect. The tribunal hall of Orbit Prime was built to humble visitors, and it succeeded. The ceiling stretched so high, it disappeared into darkness. The walls were made of some black stone that seemed to swallow light. And before her, seated on platforms that rose like mountains, sat the judges, 12 species. 12 ancient civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for longer than humanity had existed. The Valori were the tallest, with pale skin stretched over thin bodies and eyes that held no warmth. The Keth resembled insects from Earth's worst nightmares, with clicking mandibles and compound eyes that reflected Kira's image 1,000 times. There were others too, beings of crystal and shadow, and forms that hurt to look at directly. Kira was 34 years old. She had trained her entire life for this moment. She was supposed to be humanity's voice, their representative, their hope for joining the galactic community. Instead, she stood in chains made of light, listening to her species being condemned to death. The evidence is clear. The Valori High Judge spoke, his voice echoing through the chamber like wind through an empty canyon. Humanity is a Class 7. Invasive pathogen. Your history shows nothing but war. Your biology is aggressive. Your expansion rate is dangerous. You breed too fast. You consume too much. You destroy everything you touch, Kira wanted to argue. She wanted to tell them about human art and music and love. She wanted to tell them about mothers who died to save their children and soldiers who threw themselves on grenades to protect strangers. She wanted to tell them that humanity was more than its wars, but her voice had been silenced. A device around her throat prevented her from speaking. She could only listen. The sentence is exile, the Valori continued. Your species will be removed from civilized space. Your 37 colony ships will be escorted to the dead corridor. You will be given 90 rotations to leave. After that time, any human vessel found in Accord space will be destroyed without warning. The dead corridor. Kira knew what that meant. Every spacefaring species knew. It was a region of space where no stars burned bright enough to sustain life. No planets. No resources. Nothing but cold and darkness and death. They were being sent there to die. The trial ended. Guards escorted Kira to a small room where she was allowed one transmission to Earth. She stood before the camera, knowing that billions of eyes would see her face. Her father would see her face. Admiral Te-Ho, commander of Earth's fleet, would watch his daughter deliver the worst news in human history. They have given us 90 rotations to leave known space, Kira said. Her voice was steady. She would not cry. She would not show weakness. After that, they hunt us. She paused. There was more she wanted to say. She wanted to apologize for failing. She wanted to tell her people that she had tried. But the transmission was being monitored, and she knew the Accord was listening. So instead, she said something else. Do not despair. Do not surrender. Do not forget what they have done to us. The transmission ended. 12,000 light-years away, Admiral Te-Ho watched his daughter's face disappear from the screen. He was 61 years old. His hair had turned white from decades of service. His body carried scars from 3 wars. He had seen humanity at its worst and at its best. He had buried friends and enemies alike, but nothing had prepared him for this. Around him, the command center of the flagship Defiance fell silent. Officers who had served with him for years stood frozen, their faces pale with shock. Some wept quietly, others stared at nothing, trying to understand what they had just heard. Te-Ho allowed himself one moment of grief, one moment to feel the weight of what was happening, one moment to be a father who might never see his daughter again. Then the moment passed, and he became an admiral again. "Begin evacuation protocols," he said. His voice was calm. His hands did not shake. "All colony ships are to prepare for departure. We leave in 30 rotations." "Sir," his second-in-command, Captain Jinsu, spoke carefully. "The dead corridor. There is nothing there. No planets. No stations. Nothing. We cannot survive." "Then we will make something from nothing," Tejo replied. "Humanity has done it before. We crawled out of caves. We crossed oceans on wooden ships. We walked on the moon with rockets, held together by hope and mathematics. We will survive this too." He did not fully believe his own words. But that did not matter. What mattered was that his people believed them. On Earth, the news spread like fire. People gathered in streets and squares, watching the broadcasts on massive screens. Governments collapsed into emergency sessions. Leaders shouted and blamed and pointed fingers. Some called for surrender. Some called for war. Some simply called for answers that no one could give. But among the chaos, something else began to grow. It started as whispers in the crowds. It became murmurs in the halls of power. And soon, it became a roar that echoed across the entire planet. Rage. Not the hot, burning rage that fades quickly. This was something colder. Deeper. It was the rage of a species that had clawed its way up from the mud, that had survived ice ages and plagues and wars, that had split the atom and touched the face of God. It was the rage of a people who had been told they were not worthy to exist. They were not going to accept that judgment. 30 rotations later, the fleet departed. 37 ships carrying 2.3 million human souls. Men and women and children. The old and the young. The sick and the healthy. They carried with them everything humanity could gather. Seeds and tools and books and dreams. Admiral Tejo stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched as Earth grew smaller in the view screen. His home, his world, the blue marble that had given birth to his species, he did not know if he would ever see it again. The fleet entered the darkness of the dead corridor, and the stars disappeared behind them. They were alone now, abandoned, cast out to die by a galaxy that feared what they might become. But the galaxy had made a mistake. They had not sent humans to die. They had sent them somewhere far worse. They had sent them somewhere to get angry. The darkness of the dead corridor was absolute. No stars. No light. Nothing but endless black stretching in every direction. The fleet drifted through this void like ghosts, their running lights the only brightness in a universe that had forgotten what warmth meant. 60 rotations had passed since the exile began. 60 rotations of cold and fear and slow, creeping death. Medical Officer Yuna had not slept in 3 days. She moved through the hospital ship Mercy, like a woman possessed, her white coat stained with blood and sweat and tears that she no longer bothered to hide. The ship had been designed to hold 500 patients. It now held 3,000, with more arriving every hour. The dying came in waves. First, it was the elderly. Their bodies too weak to survive the poor nutrition and failing life support systems. Then came the children, their small forms giving up one by one despite everything the doctors tried. Now, it was everyone. Anyone. Death did not discriminate in the dead corridor. Yuna knelt beside a bed where a young boy lay. He was perhaps 7 years old, with thin arms and hollow cheeks. His mother sat beside him, holding his hand, singing softly in a voice that cracked with grief. The boy's name was June, and he had been born on one of the colony ships. He had never seen Earth. He had never felt real sunlight on his face, and now he never would. "Is there nothing you can do?" the mother asked, her eyes red from crying. Yuna wanted to lie. She wanted to say that everything would be fine, that June would recover, that tomorrow would be better. But she could not. She had told too many lies already. "I am sorry," she said. "His body is too weak. The malnutrition. There is nothing left to fight with." The mother nodded slowly. She understood. They all understood. In the dead corridor, death was not a surprise. It was simply waiting its turn. June died that night. He was the 407th child to die that week. On the flagship Defiance, Admiral Tejo stood before a holographic display showing the fleet's status. Red lights blinked across the map, each one representing a ship in crisis. Life support failures, hull breaches, food shortages, medical emergencies. The problems were endless, and the solutions were running out. Captain Jinsu entered the command center, his face gray with exhaustion. He carried a tablet containing the latest reports, though both men knew what they would say. "We lost 2 more ships last night," Jinsu said quietly. The cargo vessel Horizon had a reactor failure. The passenger ship Dawn. They just stopped responding. When we sent a team to investigate, they found everyone dead. Carbon dioxide poisoning. The scrubbers failed. Tejo closed his eyes. 2 ships. 800 souls. Gone. "How many have we lost in total?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. 212,000. And the rate is increasing. Tejo turned to face the view screen, staring out at the darkness that surrounded them. Somewhere in that darkness, his daughter Kira was being held on another ship. The Accord had released her after the exile began, returning her to her people so she could die with them. He had not seen her yet. The fleet was too scattered, too desperate to allow for reunions. "Sir," Jinsu continued, his voice careful, "some of the captains are suggesting we conserve resources. They want to shut down the smaller ships, consolidate the survivors onto the larger vessels. It would extend our supplies by weeks, maybe months." "And the people on those smaller ships?" Tejo asked. "They would be transferred, of course. But the ships themselves would be abandoned, stripped for parts." Tejo understood what Jinsu was not saying. Some of those ships were too far gone to save. Transferring their passengers would be difficult, dangerous, perhaps impossible. The captains were not just suggesting consolidation, they were suggesting sacrifice. "No," Tejo said. "Every ship carries souls. We abandon none." "Arm." Jinsu nodded. He had expected that answer. He had hoped for it. Meanwhile, on a small science vessel called the Seeker, something was happening that would change everything. Dr. Hana was 30 years old, with sharp eyes and quick hands, and a mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos. She had been an astrophysicist on Earth, studying the movements of stars and planets. Now she spent her days analyzing the empty space around them, searching for anything that might help the fleet survive. She had found nothing for 60 rotations. But tonight, her instruments showed something impossible. "That cannot be right," she muttered, adjusting her sensors. "There is nothing out here. There cannot be anything out here." But the readings did not change. Somewhere ahead of the fleet, in the supposedly empty void of the dead corridor, there was a mass. A large mass. Something with gravity and substance and weight. Hana ran the calculations 17 times. She checked her equipment. She called in her assistants. And finally, when she could no longer deny what she was seeing, she sent a message to the Defiance. Admiral Tejo received the transmission at 3 a.m. Ship time. He was not sleeping. He never slept anymore. "A rogue planet," Hannah's voice explained through the speakers. "It must have been ejected from its solar system millions of years ago. It has been drifting through space ever since, invisible and alone. But it is there. It is real. And Admiral, it has water. Frozen water. Yes. But water. And geothermal activity. There are hot spots beneath the surface. Places where things might grow." Tejo stood slowly from his chair. For a moment, he could not speak. He had forgotten what hope felt like, and now it was flooding through him like sunlight. "How far?" he asked. 3 weeks at our current speed. Maybe 2 if we push the engines. 3 weeks. They had been dying for 60 rotations, and salvation was only 3 weeks away. Tejo activated the fleet-wide communication system. His voice would reach every ship, every person, every soul drifting through the darkness. "This is Admiral Tejo," he said. "I have just received news that changes everything. Ahead of us, in the darkness, There is a world with water and heat, and the possibility of life. We are going to that world, and we are going to survive. Weak and goes of the Fiver side. Across the fleet, people wept. They embraced. They fell to their knees and prayed to gods they had stopped believing in. For the first time since the exile began, there was something other than despair. But the fleet was not alone in the darkness. 2 days later, the long-range sensors detected something else. Ships. Dozens of ships, moving fast, coming from the direction of Accord space. The Valori had been tracking them, and now they were coming to finish what the exile had started. The hunters had found their prey. The planet had no name yet. It was just a frozen ball of rock and ice drifting through eternal darkness. But to the 2.1 million humans who had survived the journey, it was everything. It was hope. It was home. It was the place where they would live or die. The fleet had arrived 3 days ago. Landing parties were already on the surface, drilling through ice, setting up shelters, searching for the geothermal vents that Dr. Hana had promised. The work was hard and dangerous, but people worked without complaint. They knew what waited behind them. The Valori fleet appeared on the edge of sensor range at dawn, ship time. 47 warships, their sleek forms cutting through space like knives through water. They were beautiful in a terrible way, their hulls gleaming silver, their weapons arrays humming with power that humanity could barely comprehend. Commander Woojin received the alert in the cramped ready room of the carrier Thunderbolt. He was 40 years old, with a face weathered by too many battles and eyes that had seen too many friends die. Before the exile, he had commanded Earth's finest fighter squadron. Now he commanded a collection of broken ships, held together with hope and welding torches. "How many fighters do we have?" he asked his aide. 73 operational. Maybe 80 if we can get the damaged ones flying. Woojin did the math in his head. 80 fighters against 47 capital ships, each carrying dozens of their own attack craft. The odds were not just bad, they were impossible. But impossible had stopped meaning anything to humanity. "Launch all fighters," Woojin ordered. "Tell the pilots to report to their ships, and tell them." He paused, searching for the right words. "Tell them that everyone they love is on that planet below. Their families, their children, their futures. The Valori want to take that away. They think we are just going to roll over and die." He smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "Let us show them how wrong they are." The human fighters launched in waves, their engines burning bright against the darkness. They were old ships, most of them designed before humanity had even discovered faster-than-light travel. Their weapons were primitive compared to Valori technology. Their shields were weak. Their armor was thin, but their pilots were not afraid. Pilot Nari was 23 years old. She had been born on a colony ship during the journey to the stars, and she had never set foot on Earth. Her entire life had been lived in metal corridors and recycled air, dreaming of a home she had never seen. Now she flew toward the enemy in a fighter that shook and rattled with every movement, and she was not afraid. She was angry. The Valori opened fire first. Their weapons were beams of pure energy, cutting through space like lightning. Human fighters exploded in balls of flame, their pilots dead before they could even scream. Nari watched her wingman vanish in a flash of light, there 1 second and gone the next. "All fighters, engage." Woojin's voice crackled over the radio. "Hit them hard. Hit them fast. Make them bleed." Nari dove toward the nearest Valori ship, a destroyer twice the size of her carrier. Her weapons were laughable against its shields. But she fired anyway, pouring every shot she had into the same spot again and again. Other pilots joined her, their combined fire slowly, impossibly, beginning to weaken the enemy's defenses. The Valori had not expected this. They had expected the humans to run, to scatter, to die like the animals they believed them to be. Instead, these strange creatures were attacking, throwing themselves at superior forces with no regard for their own survival, fighting with a fury that made no tactical sense. On the bridge of the Valori command ship, High Commander Vorath watched the battle with growing unease. His fleet was winning, of course. Human ships were dying by the dozen, But his own vessels were taking damage too, far more than they should have. These humans were not surrendering, they were not retreating, they were getting closer. "What are they doing?" one of his officers asked. Confusion clear in his voice. Vorath did not answer. He had studied human history before this mission. He had read about their wars, their revolutions, their endless capacity for violence. He had thought he understood them. He was beginning to realize he had understood nothing. Nari's fighter was hit. The blast tore through her engine, sending her spinning through space. Warning lights flashed, alarms screamed, smoke filled her cockpit. She had seconds to live, and she knew it. She looked at the Valori command ship, looming ahead of her. Its sensor array was exposed, a cluster of delicate equipment that guided the entire fleet. One good hit would blind them all. Nari did not hesitate. She aimed her dying ship at that sensor array and pushed her engines to maximum. The fighter screamed forward, trailing fire and smoke. Valori point defense systems fired at her, scoring hit after hit, but they could not stop her. Nothing could stop her. "See you in the next life, bastards," she said. Her fighter struck the sensor array at full speed. The explosion was massive, tearing through the command ship's hull and sending debris spinning into space. When the light faded, the array was gone. The Valori fleet was blind. On the Defiance, Admiral Tejo saw what had happened. He saw the opening that Nari's sacrifice had created, and he did not waste it. "All ships, advance," he ordered. "Target their damaged vessels. Hit them now, while they cannot see." Captain Jinsu led the counterattack, driving the fleet's few warships directly at the confused Valori formation. Human weapons, crude as they were, found their marks. Valori ships began to burn. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the Valori fleet was retreating, leaving behind the wreckage of 11 destroyed ships. Human losses were far worse. Almost 30 fighters and 2 escort vessels. But they were alive. They had won. The Valori had come to finish off a dying species. Instead, they had awakened something terrible. On Orbit Prime, the Galactic Accord received the battle footage from the survivors. The 12 elder species watched in silence as human pilots threw themselves into certain death, as tiny fighters swarmed capital ships like angry insects, as a young woman named Nari rammed her burning vessel into an enemy ship without hesitation. The Keth ambassador was the first to speak. His voice was quiet, almost trembling. "They fight like cornered animals," he said. "No. Worse than that. They fight like creatures with nothing to lose." The Valori representative remained silent. For the first time in centuries, he had no words. The elder species had exiled humanity to die in the darkness. Instead, humanity had survived. They had found a world. They had fought back. And they had won their first battle. The Accord realized, far too late, what they had done. They had not sent humanity to die. They had sent them somewhere to evolve. And evolution, once begun, could not be stopped. 3 years had passed since the first battle. 3 years since humanity had drawn blood from the Valori fleet and sent them running back to Accord space. 3 years of building, growing, and becoming something new. The planet they had found was called New Dawn now. It was no longer a frozen wasteland. Deep beneath its surface, vast caverns stretched for kilometers, warmed by geothermal vents, and lit by artificial lights that mimicked the sun humanity had lost. Cities had grown in those caverns, carved from rock and ice, filled with homes and schools and factories that never stopped working. The surface remained cold and dark. But humanity had conquered it too. Domed structures dotted the landscape, each one a testament to human stubbornness. Greenhouses grew food. Mining operations pulled metals from the ground. Shipyards built vessels that would have seemed like magic to the humans of just a decade ago. Dr. Hannah stood in her laboratory, surrounded by equipment that she had helped create. Her hair was gray now, though she was only 33. The stress of the exile had aged everyone, but her eyes still held the same sharp intelligence that had found New Dawn in the first place. On the table before her sat the remains of a Valori weapon system, captured from a destroyed ship during the first battle. For 3 years, she and her team had been taking it apart, studying it, learning its secrets. And now, finally, they had done more than learn. They had improved it. The test was successful, her assistant reported, pulling up holographic displays of the latest weapons trial. The hybrid system combines Valori energy manipulation with human ballistic technology. The result is 40% more powerful than the original Valori weapon, with half the energy consumption. Hana nodded slowly. This was what humanity did. They took things apart. They figured out how they worked. And then, they made them better. It was how they had survived for thousands of years, and it was how they would survive this too. Begin mass production, she said, and tell the Admiral that we are ready. The Admiral was no longer Teho. He had died 8 months ago, peacefully in his sleep, his body finally giving out after a lifetime of service. His final words had been to his daughter, who had held his hand as he passed. "Make them remember us," he had whispered. "Make them understand what they did." Admiral Kira had promised him she would. She stood now on the bridge of the Vengeance, the first dreadnought built entirely on New Dawn. It was massive, twice the size of anything humanity had ever created, bristling with weapons and shields that mixed human ingenuity with stolen alien technology. 100 ships surrounded it, each one newer and deadlier than anything the Exile fleet had possessed. Kira was 37 years old. Her face was hard, her eyes cold. The young diplomat who had stood before the Accord and pleaded for her people's lives was gone. In her place was something forged by loss and fire and 3 years of endless work. She thought of her father every day. She thought of the 800,000 people who had died during the exile and the years that followed. She thought of Pilot Nari and all the others who had given their lives so that humanity could survive. She would not let their sacrifices be meaningless. Elsewhere on New Dawn, a different kind of transformation was taking place. Sergeant Daesung stood before his soldiers, 300 men and women who had volunteered for the 7th Drop Regiment. They were humanity's first dedicated space assault force, trained to board enemy ships and fight in the corridors and chambers where starship weapons could not reach. Daesung had been a farmer before the exile. He had grown rice in the valleys of his homeland, living a simple life with his wife and 2 children. They had all died during the first year in the dead corridor, taken by a disease that swept through the refugee ships. He had buried them in space, watching their bodies drift away into the darkness. Something had died inside him that day. But something else had been born. "You all know why you are here," he told his soldiers. "You know what the galaxy did to us. They called us animals. They called us a disease. They cast us out to die in the darkness, and they expected us to simply disappear." He walked among them, looking into their faces. They were young, most of them, born during the exile or shortly before it. They had never known anything but struggle. They had never known anything but the knowledge that the universe wanted them dead. "They called us demons," Daesung continued. "So that is what we will become. When we board their ships, they will learn what it means to face humanity. They will learn that we are not prey. We are predators. And we have come to hunt." The soldiers responded with a roar that echoed through the training facility. They were ready. They were all ready. Over the next year, the Accord sent 3 more fleets to destroy New Dawn. The first arrived 8 months after the battle that had claimed Pilot Nari's life. It was twice the size of the original Valori force, composed of ships from 5 different species. They expected to find refugees, desperate and dying. They found a fortress. Human ships met them at the edge of the system, faster and more maneuverable than anything the Accord had expected. Daesung's drop regiment boarded a Keth carrier and captured it in less than an hour, turning its weapons on its own fleet. Dr. Hana's hybrid weapons tore through shields that should have been impenetrable. The Accord fleet was destroyed almost to the last ship. The survivors fled back to civilized space, carrying tales of horror. The second fleet arrived 6 months later. It was larger still, equipped with new weapons designed specifically to counter human tactics. It did not matter. Humanity had already adapted, already improved, already changed. The second fleet died faster than the first. The third fleet was the largest of all, led by the Valori High Commander himself. It carried the best ships and the finest warriors the Accord could gather. It was supposed to be the final solution to the human problem. It lasted 3 days. After that, no more fleets came. The Accord had finally understood what they had created. Rumors began to spread across the galaxy. Travelers spoke of ships emerging from the dead corridor. Ships that moved like ghosts and struck like hammers. Merchants told stories of human soldiers who could not be killed, who fought with a fury that bordered on madness. Scientists whispered about technology that should not exist, weapons and shields and engines that combined the best of a dozen species into something entirely new. The exile had been meant to erase humanity from existence. Instead, it had forged them into something terrifying. On New Dawn, the first children born after the arrival were now 3 years old. They ran through the underground cities, laughing and playing, knowing nothing of the suffering that had brought their people here. They were innocent and pure and full of hope, but their parents were not innocent. Their parents remembered, and their parents were preparing. In her quarters aboard the Vengeance, Admiral Kira looked at a photograph of her father. He smiled at her from across the years, his face still young, still full of the hope that the galaxy had destroyed. "We are ready," she said to the empty room. "We are coming." The galaxy had cast humanity out to die. Now humanity was coming back. And they were not coming as refugees or diplomats or beggars asking for mercy. They were coming as conquerors. The first human armada emerged from the dead corridor, like a storm breaking across calm waters. 300 warships, each one built on New Dawn, each one carrying weapons that the galaxy had never seen. At their head flew the dreadnought Vengeance, its hull painted black, its weapons charged and ready. Admiral Kira stood on the bridge, watching the stars appear on her view screen for the first time in 7 years. Real stars. Living stars. The stars of a galaxy that had tried to kill her people. "All ships report ready," Captain Sumin announced from her station. She was 35 now. A veteran of every battle humanity had fought since the exile. Her face bore scars from a boarding action 2 years ago, when a Keth warrior had nearly taken her eye. She had killed that warrior with her bare hands. "The fleet awaits your orders." Kira did not respond immediately. She was looking at the tactical display, at the Keth border systems that lay before them. These were the worlds that had voted for humanity's exile. These were the people who had called her species a disease. "Open a channel to all ships," she said finally. The communication system hummed to life. Across 300 vessels, crews stopped what they were doing to listen. Soldiers in drop pods, pilots in fighters, engineers in engine rooms. They all heard what their admiral said next. 7 years ago, we stood before the Accord and asked to be treated as equals. We asked for nothing but the chance to exist. They answered by condemning us to death. They sent us into the darkness to die, and they expected us to disappear like good little animals. Her voice was cold, steady, filled with a quiet rage that had been building for 7 long years. We did not disappear. We survived. We built. We grew strong. And now we have returned. Not to beg for mercy. Not to ask for permission. We have returned to show the galaxy that humanity is not prey. We are not animals to be culled. We are a people. And we will be respected. She paused, letting her words sink in. Today, we strike the Keth border worlds. Our targets are military installations and defense platforms. We do not attack civilian centers. We do not slaughter innocents. We are not them. But every soldier, every weapon, every ship that stands against us will be destroyed without mercy. Is that understood? A roar came back through the communication system. Hundreds of thousands of voices united in a single cry of fury and determination. Then let us begin. The Keth had not expected an attack. Why would they? The humans were supposed to be dead, wiped out by the fleets that had been sent into the dead corridor. The few survivors that remained were supposed to be broken, scattered, no threat to anyone. The first warning came when a border station detected the approaching fleet. The officer on duty thought his sensors were malfunctioning. He ran diagnostics. He checked his readings. And then the human ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly on top of his position. He had time to send one message before the station was destroyed. That message reached the Keth homeworld 8 minutes later. By then, the first 3 border systems had already fallen. Sergeant Dae-sung led the assault on the military moon of Thek 4. His drop pods screamed through the thin atmosphere, surrounded by 200 others, each one carrying soldiers who had trained for this moment their entire lives. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky around them, but the pods were fast and small and hard to hit. Dae-sung's pod struck the ground with enough force to crack the stone beneath it. The hatch blew open before the pod had even stopped moving, and he was out, rifle raised, firing at the Keth defenders who rushed to meet him. The Keth were formidable warriors. They stood 2 meters tall, their bodies covered in hard shells that could stop most weapons. Their claws could tear through metal. Their strength was legendary among the species of the Accord, but Dae-sung and his soldiers were not most warriors. The battle lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of corridor fighting, of close combat, of blood and screaming, and death. The Keth fought with everything they had, defending every room, every hallway, every chamber. They killed dozens of human soldiers. They wounded hundreds more, but they could not stop them. By the time the sun rose on Thek 4, the garrison was gone. Every Keth soldier was dead. Dae-sung stood in the command center, his armor covered in alien blood, his rifle smoking in his hands. Around him, his surviving soldiers secured the facility. "Report our success to the Admiral," he said. "And tell her we are ready for the next target." The news spread across the galaxy like fire. The humans were back. They were attacking. They were winning. On Orbit Prime, the Galactic Accord convened an emergency session for the first time in a century. The 12 elder species gathered in the same chamber where they had condemned humanity to death 7 years ago. But now, their positions had reversed. The Valori High Commander demanded immediate action. "We must unite our forces," he insisted. "We must crush these humans before they grow any stronger. If we do not act now, they will destroy us all." The Keth Queen trembled with rage. "They have invaded our territory. They have killed our soldiers. This is an act of war. We must respond in kind." Others were less certain. The Salith had remained neutral throughout humanity's exile, and their elder, Mora, spoke with a voice heavy with age and wisdom. "You cast them into darkness to die," she said, her ancient eyes sweeping across the assembled species. "And they built a sun from their own fury. You created this enemy. You made them what they are, and now." She paused, shaking her head slowly. "I do not believe you can stop them." "What would you have us do?" the Valori demanded. "Surrender? Bow before these animals?" "I would have you consider what happens if you fight and lose," Mora replied. "Because if these humans defeat us, they will not show us the same mercy we showed them." The debate raged for hours. In the end, the Accord voted for war. All 12 species would unite their forces against humanity. The largest military alliance in galactic history would be formed, dedicated to a single purpose: the destruction of the human species. The declaration of war was broadcast across all frequencies. Every ship, every station, every world in the galaxy heard the message. The Accord was coming. The combined might of 12 ancient civilizations was being gathered. Humanity would be destroyed. Admiral Kira received the declaration aboard the Vengeance. Her officers watched her face, searching for fear, for doubt, for any sign of weakness. They found none. Instead, Kira smiled. It was a cold smile, tired and hard. The smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment for 7 long years. "Good," she said, her voice carrying across the silent bridge. "Let them all come." She turned to her tactical display, where the positions of the Accord forces were being tracked in real time. Thousands of ships from a dozen species, gathering like wolves preparing to hunt. But humanity had stopped being prey a long time ago. "Signal the fleet," Kira ordered. "We advance to the Chorus Nebula. That is where we will meet them. That is where this war will be decided." The Vengeance turned toward the heart of the galaxy, and 300 ships followed in its wake. Behind them, the first human territory in Accord space was already being fortified. Ahead of them, the greatest battle in history was waiting. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for something greater. They were fighting for their place among the stars. The Chorus Nebula stretched across space like a wound in reality. Clouds of gas and dust swirling in colors that had no names. Stars were born here, and stars died here. Their light filtered through layers of cosmic matter until everything glowed with an eerie, beautiful radiance. It was here that the fate of humanity would be decided. Admiral Kira watched the Accord fleet arrive through the view screen of the Vengeance. They came in waves, ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel like rain falling from the sky. Valori cruisers, sleek and silver. Keth carriers, bristling with weapons. Ships from species whose names humanity did not even know, all gathered for a single purpose. 5,000 vessels. 5,000 engines of destruction. Each one carrying warriors who had been told that humanity was a disease that needed to be cured. Against them stood 300 human ships. "Final count confirmed," Captain Suman reported, her voice steady despite the impossible odds. "We are outnumbered 15-1. Kira nodded slowly. She had known this moment would come. She had prepared for it her entire life. Every battle, every sacrifice, every death had led to this single point in time. "Open a channel to the fleet," she said. The communication system hummed to life, connecting her to every human ship in the formation. Soldiers who had survived the exile. Pilots who had been born in the darkness. Engineers who had built their fleet from nothing. They all listened. "The enemy believes that numbers will save them," Kira began. "They believe that because there are more of them, they will win. But they have forgotten something important. They have forgotten who we are." She stood from her command chair, her eyes fixed on the enemy fleet. "We are humanity. We crawled out of caves when the universe tried to freeze us. We crossed oceans when the universe tried to drown us. We walked on the moon when the universe tried to keep us trapped. And when they cast us into the darkness to die, we built a new home and came back stronger." Her voice rose, filling with the fire that had kept her going through 7 years of exile. "Today, we show them what that means. Today, we show them that humanity does not surrender, does not retreat, does not die. Today, we make them remember us forever. For Earth, for New Dawn, for everyone we have lost." Attack. The battle began. Human ships surged forward, their engines burning bright against the nebula's glow. They did not form neat lines or careful formations. They swarmed like insects, like wolves, like the demons the galaxy had called them. Smaller and faster than anything the Accord had, they darted between enemy vessels, striking weak points, exploiting gaps, refusing to stay still long enough to be destroyed. The Accord fleet responded with overwhelming firepower. Energy beams lanced through space, striking human ships and turning them into expanding clouds of debris. Missiles by the thousands streaked toward human positions. The void filled with fire and death. On the carrier Indomitable, Captain Sumin coordinated the fighter wings with precision born from years of experience. Her pilots were outnumbered 10-1. But they fought like they were invincible. They dove through enemy formations, drawing fire away from the larger ships. They targeted engines and weapons systems, crippling vessels 10 times their size. They died by the dozen, and kept coming anyway. "Wing 7 is gone," her tactical officer reported. "Wing 12 has taken heavy casualties. Wing 3 is requesting permission to retreat." "Denied," Suman said, her voice hard. "There is no retreat. Tell them to regroup and continue the attack." She knew she was sending them to their deaths. She knew that most of her pilots would not survive the day. But if they ran now, if they showed weakness now, everything would be lost. Medical Officer Yuna worked in the operating theater of the hospital ship Mercy, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. Wounded poured in faster than she could treat them, burns and shrapnel wounds and injuries so severe that survival seemed impossible. But she did not stop. She could not stop. A young soldier was brought to her table, his body broken almost beyond recognition. He could not have been more than 19 years old. His eyes found hers, and she saw the fear in them, the same fear she had seen in little June's eyes, all those years ago in the dead corridor. "Am I going to die?" he asked. Yuna looked at his wounds. She knew the answer, but she also knew what he needed to hear. "Not today," she said. "Not on my table." She worked on him for 3 hours. Against all odds, he survived. The battle raged for 72 hours. 3 days and 3 nights of continuous combat, the largest military engagement in the history of the galaxy. Ships died by the hundreds on both sides, the nebula filled with debris and bodies and the flickering remains of destroyed vessels. Sergeant Dae Sung led his regiment in boarding action after boarding action. They captured a Valori destroyer and turned its weapons on its own fleet. They stormed a Keth carrier and detonated its power core from the inside. They fought through corridors filled with enemies, losing soldiers with every step, never stopping, never slowing down. On the third day, Dae Sung was defending a breached corridor on a captured cruiser when a Valori warrior caught him by surprise. The alien's blade cut through his armor like paper, scoring 17 separate wounds across his body. Dae Sung should have died. Any normal person would have died. But Dae Sung was not normal anymore. He had stopped being normal the day he buried his family in the darkness. He grabbed the Valori by its throat and squeezed until the creature stopped moving. Then he kept fighting, bleeding from wounds that should have killed him 3 times over, until his soldiers finally dragged him to safety. When the dust settled on the third day, the Accord fleet was broken. They had lost over 3,000 ships. 6 of the 12 elder species had seen their forces completely destroyed. The survivors were fleeing in every direction, their formation shattered, their confidence gone. Humanity had lost 2. Of the 300 ships that had entered the battle, only 97 remained. Tens of thousands of soldiers were dead. The hospital ships were overflowing with wounded. Victory had come at a terrible price. But it was victory nonetheless. Admiral Kira stood on the damaged bridge of the Vengeance, surrounded by debris and flickering lights. She was wounded, a gash across her forehead that had been hastily bandaged. Her uniform was torn, her hands were shaking, but she was alive. Her people were alive, and the enemy was running. "Open a channel," she said. "All frequencies. I want every ship in the galaxy to hear this." The communication system struggled to comply, damaged systems fighting to function. But finally, the connection was established. Kira's voice would reach every corner of the known universe. "This is Admiral Kira of the human fleet," she began. "We did not ask for war. We asked only to exist. You denied us that right. You cast us out to perish. But we did not perish. We rose. And now we stand at your gates." She paused, gathering her strength. "Not as monsters. Not as animals. Not as the demons you called us. We stand as equals. Grant us that, and this ends. Treat us with the dignity that every sentient species deserves, and we will show you mercy." Her eyes hardened. "Deny us, and we finish what you started." The message ended. Across the galaxy, species that had ruled for millennia listened to the words of a species they had tried to destroy. They heard the offer. They heard the threat, and they understood, finally, what humanity had become. 1 year had passed since the Battle of the Chorus Nebula. 1 year since humanity had broken the combined might of 12 ancient civilizations. 1 year since the galaxy had learned to fear a species it had once dismissed as vermin. The Treaty of Orbit Prime was signed on a cool morning, station time. The same chamber that had condemned humanity to death 8 years ago now witnessed something that would have seemed impossible just a decade before. Admiral Kira walked into the tribunal hall with her head held high. She was not in chains this time. She was not standing before judges. She was standing among equals. The Galactic Accord was no more. In its place, a new galactic council had been formed. No single species would rule. No single voice would dominate. Every civilization, from the mightiest empire to the smallest colony, would have a seat at the table, including humanity. Kira pressed her palm against the treaty document, adding her signature to those of the other species' representatives. The Valori High Judge was there, his face unreadable but his posture bent with the weight of defeat. The Keth Queen stood beside him, her compound eyes reflecting the lights of the chamber. Elder Mora of the Selith smiled as she watched, the only one present who seemed genuinely pleased. "Let this be the beginning of a new era," Mora said, her ancient voice carrying through the hall. "An era where we learn from the mistakes of the past, where we judge each other not by fear, but by actions, where we understand that every species has the right to exist." Kira nodded slowly. "Humanity did not want war," she said. "We wanted a home, a place among the stars. You tried to take that from us, but we do not seek revenge. We seek only what we have always sought: the chance to live." The ceremony ended with handshakes and formal words, but Kira did not stay for the celebrations that followed. She had somewhere else to be. New Dawn was different now. The underground cities had grown larger, spreading through the caverns like roots of a great tree. The surface domes had multiplied, each one a small community filled with families and laughter and life. Children ran through corridors where refugees had once huddled in darkness, their voices echoing with joy. Kira walked alone to the highest point on the planet's surface, a peak that rose above the domes and looked out at the endless darkness above. Here, cut into the black stone of New Dawn, was the memorial, 2.3 million names. Every human who had begun the exile, carved into the rock so that they would never be forgotten. Over 800,000 of those names belonged to people who had not survived to see this day. The young, the old, the sick, the strong, all of them gone, claimed by the darkness before humanity had learned to make it their home. Kira walked among the names, running her fingers across the stone. She found her father's name near the center, Admiral Teho, etched in letters that seemed to glow in the dim light. "We did it," she whispered. "We made them remember us." She stood there for a long time, alone with the ghosts of her people. Elsewhere on New Dawn, other survivors found their own ways to move forward. Dr. Hana stood at the entrance of a new building, its doors open for the first time. The Galactic Research Institute. It was called. Scientists from 17 species would work here, sharing knowledge, pushing the boundaries of what was possible, learning from each other. Hana had named it after her father, who had taught her to look at the stars and dream of what might be. "Do you think this will work?" her assistant asked. "Humans and aliens? Working together? After everything that has happened?" Hana smiled. "That is what science is for. To find common ground. To ask questions that do not care about species or history. We will stumble. We will argue. We will fail. But we will also succeed. And slowly, one discovery at a time, we will build something better." End quote. The first alien scientists arrived that afternoon. A young Valori physicist who had lost her family in the war. A Keth engineer who had spent years fighting humans and now wanted to understand them. Others followed. They were nervous, uncertain, carrying the weight of old hatreds, but Hana welcomed them all. Sergeant Daesung had survived his wounds, though just barely. The doctors had told him he would never walk again. He had proven them wrong within 3 months. Now he walked with a limp, his body carrying scars that would never fully heal. But he walked. He did not return to the military. Instead, he went to the academy on New Dawn, the school where the next generation of soldiers would be trained. But he did not teach them only combat. He taught them something else. Strength without mercy is tyranny, he told his students, a mix of human faces and alien ones. Mercy without strength is extinction. You must be both. Strong enough to win any battle. Merciful enough to know when not to fight. His students listened. They learned. And slowly, the warriors of humanity became something more than weapons. Captain Suman became an ambassador. The same woman who had coordinated fighter wings in the bloodiest battle in history now walked the halls of diplomatic stations, building bridges with species that had once been enemies. It was harder than fighting, in some ways. Easier, in others. She was good at it. And Medical Officer Yuna finally went home. The transport ship landed on Earth on a morning in spring, when the cherry blossoms were blooming and the air smelled of rain. Yuna stepped onto the ground and felt real soil beneath her feet for the first time in 8 years. She was 40 now, her hair touched with gray, her face lined by years of grief and work and hope. She walked to the shore of Busan, the city where she had been born. The water was exactly as she remembered it. Blue and vast and endless. She stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in colors that new dawn could never match. She thought of little June, who had died in the darkness so long ago. She thought of Pilot Nari, who had given her life in the first battle. She thought of all the patients she had saved and all the ones she had lost. "We made it," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We made it." Across the galaxy, a new story was spreading. It passed from species to species, from world to world, from generation to generation. It was a warning and a lesson, told in whispers and written in histories, a reminder of what happened when the universe underestimated the wrong species. The Valori told it to their children before they slept. The Keth carved it into their monuments. The Seleth included it in their ancient books of wisdom. Even species that had never met a human knew the tale. Never exile a human, the story went. Never corner them. Never give them a reason to fight. Never take their hope, because they will forge new hope from their own suffering. Never tell them they cannot survive, because they will survive out of spite. Because, when you cast them out to perish, they do not perish. They rise. They build. They return. They tear the sky and hurl their demons out. On New Dawn, in a small house near the memorial, Admiral Kira sat with her daughter. The girl was 5 years old, born after the war, knowing nothing of exile or battle or death. She looked at her mother with curious eyes. "What was it like?" the girl asked. "Before?" Kira thought about the question for a long time. How could she explain darkness to someone who had only known light? How could she describe despair to someone who had only known hope? "It was hard," she said finally. "Very hard. But we survived. And now you get to grow up in a galaxy where humans have a place. A real place. Not because we begged for it. Not because we were given it. Because we earned it." Her daughter smiled and went back to playing with her toys, unaware of the weight her mother carried. Kira looked out the window at the stars above. They were not the same stars she had seen from Earth as a child. They were stranger and more distant, filtered through the thin atmosphere of a world that should not have been able to support life. But they were her stars now, humanity's stars, and no one would ever take them away again.